Hi, welcome to Monster Transmissions. You're here in Curt's Corner. Today we're going to go over a 480 transmission and the common problems or the common failure components that happen with these units. Now this is a GM transmission that was put in a lot of their heavy-duty applications, primarily trucks, 1 ton, 3/4, 2 ton. The big trucks all run this big heavy-duty 480 transmission. It's a 4-speed automatic, and it went from 1990 all the way up to 2008. So it's a very strong, durable unit, but just like any transmission, there's the evolution of the transmission to improve the performance and quality of the drivetrain. So we're going to take apart a later model unit. This happens to be a 2003, and we'll go through the changes to the unit as well as the common things that go bad on the 480 and why, and what we can do to correct those issues. We're now going to take off and remove the tail housing on this two-wheel drive application, collapse the metal seal, the metal clad seal, and it'll come right out of the tail, just like that. This is the seal, the dry shaft on the two-wheel drive applications. Roll the transmission over to expose the pan. Most of these have a 10mm head. Some of the earlier units have a 13mm head. So we remove the pan. This is the pan gasket. Some have neoprene like this, cork. We're going to remove the filter. This is actually the linkage assembly here, the tensioner for the linkage. So we're going to remove that first. I'm going to put all these bolts in the pan. To keep it organized, if you'd like, you can disassemble the valve body bolts and you can set the entire valve body with the bolts on it into the pan, keeping it together. I'm going to disconnect the harness. Remove this oil feed tube. This is the pressure manifold switch. That takes 8mm bolts. We're going to remove that. And the valve body is released. A lot of the problems with the transmission on this particular unit don't involve the valve body. We're now going to remove the actual front servo. It has a spring assembly here. And this is actually a reverse servo. We're going to remove this cover to expose the servo. We're now going to go ahead and remove the balance of the harness. So simply just tap this into the case. And this is your actual manual linkage assembly here. So we're going to remove this assembly. Now what they have here, it looks like a common nail right here in the unit, but it's a unique stop for the linkage so it doesn't slide out of the case. So we're going to remove that and the nut to remove the shaft so you can change the linkage seal, as well as removing the manual linkage system. The linkage shaft out of the case, and this is the linkage assembly. And now you'll notice that there's a series of check balls. They're steel check balls. So just use a magnet to collect them all up. We're going to remove this, and there's one in the back of the case that we're going to remove which holds the center support in place. So we're going to remove both of those. Before we remove the pump, there is the lockup seal on the input shaft. You must remove this seal. Now we're going to remove the pump assembly. To free that up, apply pressure and tap the case. Break up that gasket seal that it has to the case. It could have been there for many years. You see how easy it is to remove the pump once that's removed. We remove this snap ring here on the perimeter. Okay, remove the snap ring. Now we're going to remove the 4th clutch top backing plate, which will expose the clutches themselves. You're going to remove all the steels and the clutches. That'll expose the input shaft. Pull out the fourth clutch housing. Here's the forward drum. And they're going to see some of the problems with this drum here, as well as the discoloration. You see how black this has got. That's another sign of overheating. And now we're going to expose the direct drum. Reverse band. You can simply just grab the intermediate clutch assembly. Here's all the clutches and seals. And now we can remove the center support and the rear planetary assembly. Here's the whole rear planetary assembly. One of the issues that the 480s have, number one, is overheating. In the early years, they had the coolant line fittings. Both fittings were in the front of the transmission here. In fact, it still has the casting for the coolant line fitting in the front. And then later, like 97, 98, they moved the oil fitting from here, the return line from your transcooler, came back here towards the front of the transmission case. And they ran an oil feed tube from here back to the rear planetary. In 97, 98, they changed that design, eliminated that oil feed tube, and ran the coolant line all the way back here to the back of the case. The cold fluid came back to the transmission, returned right to the planetary, right through the center support. So it actually was fed directly into the center support here. Okay, so 98 and up, they changed and corrected that issue with the planetaries, this section here, from burning up to prevent that from happening. Another issue that these transmissions had was with the overdrive planetary. They would also burn up, but what would happen is this shaft goes into this drum assembly here. This shaft has two Teflon rings here, and what would happen is it'll cut ring grooves inside here and lose lubrication. And I can tell you that's exactly what happened with this drum set, because there's deep ring grooves in this drum. You can also tell overheated just by the coloration of this drum. You can see how dark it is here. That means it was starving this planetary for oil. And the other area that these things have problems is when these drums, like you see here on this forward drum area, that these areas ride on the clutches, for example, in this drum. And what can happen is if it runs low on fluid and these clutches burn, the other thing that happens is these clutches can eventually try to slip past this drum and will cut grooves in this drum. And when the drum goes to apply the clutch pack, it'll apply part of it, half of it, or won't apply at all, because these will get hung up on the grooves of this drum. And the other common issues with these units is the rear planetary, that even though they're lubricated, you run it low on oil just a few times, that these planetaries will get hot and wobble, okay? And then it ultimately will break one of the gears and then break the sun gear, and that's a common issue with a 480 transmission. So there's several issues with the 480. The main thing is overheating and maintaining the service of it, and the other issues are if it runs low on fluid and you fill it up, the damage may already be done because it's starved, cause the Teflon rings not to seal, cause the clutches to prematurely burn and wear out, and then not shift properly or shift at all. But if you have any further questions on a 480 transmission, on how to purchase one, what application you have for them to work in, feel free to give us a call here at Monster at 1-800-708-0087, and we'll talk to you then.